The Space and Rocket Museum in Huntsville, Alabama is very much worth a visit for those who like that sort of thing. I'm thinking of Cape Canaveral in Florida, for example. Well, the Space and Rocket Museum in Huntsville is not as big. They don't have quite as many exhibits. It doesn't cover as much ground, but boy, do they have a lot of interesting stuff. This actually got started right after World War II when Werner von Braun and his merry band of rocket scientists came over to the United States to work on our space program and our rocket program, probably in exchange for their sins for working for Hitler. The Space and Rocket Museum has a lot of outdoor exhibits as well as many interesting things indoors. It was a beautiful day the day I happened to be in Huntsville, so I spent most of my time outdoors looking at the Saturn I rocket, which was kind of the first of these big rockets that we developed. And then, of course, there's the big guy, the Saturn V. In fact, the entrance to the Saturn V exhibit is where the bulk of the museum exhibits are. I didn't even realize that until I had been traipsing around outside so much and I got kind of tired and didn't really take as big advantage of the indoor exhibits as I could have, but there's a lot of great stuff in there. But the big draw, of course, is the Saturn V, which is the size of a football field. That's what put the men on the moon. And you'll see at the Space and Rocket Museum a model of the lunar module, the LEM. It's really small. I thought that it would be a lot bigger than it is, but it's pretty tiny. Those guys were cramped in there, and they were really cramped inside those space capsules, as you can see when you go through the exhibit halls. They've got the Space Lab, the first of the international space stations out there. It too is surprisingly small, in my opinion. And, of course, they use these rockets for military as well as civilian purposes, and we have some examples of those, including the Spartan anti-ballistic missile. There is the multiple rocket launcher. You probably saw that in operation during the Desert Storm or some of the other Mideast operations that were involved in, some newsreel footage of that. And going back to the days of Vietnam, the Chinook helicopter, very much in use at that time. Because the scientists came over from Germany, it turned out they built a lot of German restaurants in Huntsville, and I went to them, one of them, and it was pretty good. Not as good as the one in Helen, Georgia, up in the Georgia hills that we ate at a few years ago, and not even as good as the Black Forest Inn in Minneapolis. But nonetheless, a German meal was a good way to cap off this rather heavily exertion day at the Rocket Space and Space Museum in Huntsville. You'll see it when you drive by on the freeway, on one part of the freeway system there in Huntsville. You'll see the Saturn V sitting way up in the air, and it'll be sort of an invitation. It'll sort of beckon to you, and my suggestion is that you give in to that temptation. Go in there, visit it, enjoy the museum, and see if you don't have a pretty good time as I did.